A new year gave the billionaire CEO one last chance to claim his quadruplets. He walked out when I was pregnant. Now he's the only man on earth who can keep our son alive tonight. While the world counts down to midnight, I'm standing in a hospital corridor, holding a phone that could save my child or shatter me all over again. 15 years ago, he chose his billion-dollar company over me, and he never knew I went on to give birth to 4 of his children. Now the doctors are saying his blood is our last chance, and I have less than an hour to decide if I can beg the man who abandoned us to come back. If you're a mother or grandmother who's ever swallowed your pride for your family, you already know the weight of that phone in my hand. Stay with me, because when I finally dial his number, it doesn't just decide my son's future, it forces all of us to face the man who should have been there from the very beginning. New Year's Eve is supposed to smell like champagne and hope. Mine smelled like antiseptic, old fear, and burned coffee gone bitter on a warming plate. The nurses had strung a plastic garland across the nurses' station, something cheap and metallic that tried too hard to look festive under fluorescent lights. Somewhere down the corridor, a TV murmured a countdown show, the audience cheering for a future they believed would be kinder. I wasn't watching the clock. I was watching my children, 4 of them. Harold paced the hospital corridor, his shoulders tense, trying to look older than 17. He walked like a man back straight, jaw set, but every few steps his fingers twitched, reaching for a phone he'd already checked a dozen times. Elizabeth sat rigid in a plastic chair, ankles crossed neatly, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. She kept wiping under her eyes quickly, as if catching the tears early might somehow keep them from falling. Kenneth leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes hard. He was the one who swallowed his fear and spit it back out as sarcasm. His foot tapped an angry rhythm against the tile, like he was daring the universe to try him. And John, my quiet one, sat beside the vending machine, back against the cold wall, knees pulled up, fingers tracing circles on his jeans. His gaze stayed on the floor, but every time a nurse walked past, his shoulders flinched just enough for me to notice. They all shared the same eyes, his eyes. I told myself I'd buried that thought years ago, but grief has a way of digging up the names you thought were safely gone. Mrs. Hill, I turned. Dr. Kevin stood in the doorway of the consultation room, his expression too carefully arranged to be anything but bad news. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked softly. My heart knew before my feet moved. Inside, the small room felt too bright, too clean, like it was prepared to host bad news with clinical efficiency. I sat because that's what you do when your world is about to tilt you, anchor your body, even if your spirit is about to fall. He sat across from me, hands folded. Doctors always folded their hands when they were about to hurt you with words. "The latest results came back," he said gently. We repeated the tests to be certain. "How bad is it?" My voice didn't shake. "Years of practice," he exhaled. "We've exhausted all local options. There's only one viable donor match worldwide with the genetic markers we need. One." The word rang in my ears like a bell toll. I swallowed. "Vo?" He held my gaze, pity softening the edges of his professionalism. "According to the registry, the match is a direct biological parent." My throat closed. The father. Yes. A name rose in my chest like something long buried and suddenly unchained. I didn't say it out loud. "Not yet, Mrs." He added quietly, "Without this donor, Kenneth's chances drop dramatically. With it, he has a real shot. Real shot. Doctors never said guarantee. They said shot, like we were lining up hope against a wall and watching it duck bullets." I thanked him. I always thanked people when my world collapsed. Old habit. When I stepped back into the corridor, the overhead lights hummed, the antiseptic smell wrapped around me, and somewhere a nurse laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. Harold saw my face first. He always did. "What aren't you telling us, Mom?" he asked, voice low, as he crossed the space between us. I looked at all 4 of them. The babies I once counted as heartbeats on a monitor before they were names on school rosters and shoes by my front door. The truth pressed against my ribs, sharp and unforgiving. "The donor," I said carefully, "the only one who can help, is your father." Silence fell. Not the kind that passes, the kind that rearranges the air. Kenneth let out a short, bitter laugh. "You mean the billionaire ghost?" Elizabeth's eyes filled instantly. "You said he didn't want us." "He didn't," I answered softly. "Not then." John lifted his gaze for the first time, and the question in his eyes was older than 15. Does he even know we exist? His voice broke something in me that had been barely holding. Outside, somewhere far beyond the thick hospital glass, fireworks were already starting in the distant sharp bursts of color cutting into the sky. Inside, all my old choices were exploding quietly. If any part of this feels like pieces of your own story being the one who stayed, the one who held it together, don't go. Let this be a place where your sacrifices are finally seen, one scene at a time. I took a breath that didn't feel like it belonged to me and forced my feet toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. I locked the door behind me and gripped the sink, staring at the woman in the mirror. The lines around my eyes were deeper than they had any right to be. Gray threaded through my hair in strands I'd stopped bothering to hide. My shoulders sagged in a way that betrayed every late-night shift, every bill paid late but paid, every fever cooled with a damp cloth and whispered prayer. This is what strength looks like after 15 years of doing it alone, I thought. Not glamorous. Just standing. I turned on the faucet, splashed cold water on my face, and watched it drip from my chin like something being baptized in inevitability. Because there it was. The part I'd avoided even in my own thoughts. To save my son, I had to resurrect the man I'd spent 15 years burying. Caro Arturo. The name felt foreign and familiar all at once. Once upon a time, saying it had tasted like hope. Later, it tasted like betrayal. Tonight, it tasted like medicine with a warning label. I dried my hands slowly, buying seconds from a future I couldn't outrun. Then I took my phone out. His number was still there. I had never deleted it. I told myself it was for emergencies like a fire extinguisher in a glass box you pray you never have to break. The truth was simpler. I had never quite let go. His name glowed on the screen, small and accusing. I thought of every night I'd paced with crying babies while his face smiled from magazine covers. Every school form where I wrote father, deceased not because he was dead, but because grief was easier to explain than abandonment. My thumb hovered over the call button. If I did this, everything changed. If I didn't, I knew exactly what I was risking. I thought of Kenneth's pale face, the way his breathing sometimes caught, the quiet at his bedside that felt too much like a goodbye waiting for its cue. I pressed call. The ringing started. Once. Twice. I could have hung up. I didn't. On the third ring, he answered. Hello? His voice. Deeper, maybe. Rougher around the edges, but still unmistakably his. He hesitated. Then Vivian? He recognized my number. After 15 years. My heart collapsed in on itself, but my voice stayed steady. Our son is dying, I said. Not my son. Ooh. The word hung between us like a verdict and a beginning. And as the cheap garland shimmered under harsh hospital lights and the world outside cheered for a new year they didn't understand, I realized this year would not ask me for resolutions. It would demand reckoning. When the call ended, I just stood there. The phone felt heavy in my hand, like it carried not only his voice but every version of myself I'd tried to outgrow. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Water dripped slowly from the faucet I hadn't turned all the way off. 15 years of silence shattered in less than 30 seconds. I pressed my palms to the edge of the sink and let my head hang forward. For a moment, I wasn't a mother or a woman in a hospital bathroom. I was 23 again, hopeful, foolish, standing in a tiny apartment kitchen waiting for a man who never came back. If you know what it is to love someone who didn't know how to love you back yet, breathe with me here. You're not alone in that remembering. I straightened, wiped my face, and walked back into the hallway. The kids were exactly where I'd left them, because where else do children go when the world shifts under their feet? They stay in the last place they saw you standing, like you're the only solid thing they trust. Harold looked up first. Mom? I called him, I said, 4 different reactions all at once. Harold's jaw clenched. Elizabeth's eyes widened. Kenneth's mouth twisted. John's fingers tightened on his jeans. What did he say? Elizabeth asked. I swallowed. He said my name. Kenneth rolled his eyes. Wow, Father of the Year. He's coming, I added quietly. That silenced even him. Harold stepped closer. How soon? Tonight, I said. He didn't hesitate. John's brows drew together. He knows about us now? Yes. I held his gaze. He knows. There was a moment thin as glass where the air felt fragile, like one wrong word could shatter everything. Elizabeth sank back into her chair. What if he doesn't like us? The question pierced me. There is nothing about you to dislike, I said firmly. If anyone fails tonight, it won't be you. Kenneth scoffed. "Oh, I plan on failing his expectations on purpose." "Ken," Harold warned. "What?" Kenneth snapped. "We're just supposed to welcome the guy who bailed before we were born?" "No," I said. "You're supposed to stay alive. That's all I'm asking of you tonight." He looked away, anger dimming into something softer, more wounded. "Feels like that part isn't up to me." I moved closer, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "We do what we can with what we have. Tonight, what we have is him." He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. That was enough. The waiting felt longer than the years between us. I sat, then stood, then walked, then sat again. Nurses came and went. The clock crawled. Every time the elevator dinged, my heart jumped into my throat. I thought of the last time I'd seen him, not in person, but on a magazine cover. Carl Arturo, the man who turned risk into empire. I remember staring at that glossy page, my grocery cart half full of discount cereal and generic detergent, and thinking, you turned risk into an empire. I turned it into 4 lunchboxes and overdue bills. Back then, I believed I had buried him in anger, in necessity, in the sheer exhaustion of survival. I learned how to fix leaky faucets, change tires, sign school forms in both parent lines when no one was looking. He became a chapter I never wanted to reread. Until tonight. If you've ever said, "I'm done," and meant it with your whole chest, only to be forced by life to revisit what you closed, then you already understand the kind of courage this took. Not the pretty kind. The raw, shaking kind. The elevator dinged again. This time the sound sank into my bones. Footsteps. Low voices. Then around the corner. Him. He looked almost exactly like the man I remembered, and nothing like him at all. The suit was different, more expensive, probably. His hair carried threads of gray at the temples. There were deeper lines around his eyes, the kind you earn from years of late nights and harder mornings. But it was him. His gaze flicked past the nurse's station over the rows of chairs and landed on me like it had never stopped looking. "Vivian," he breathed. My name in his mouth felt like touching a scar you forgot you had. I didn't rush toward him. I didn't slap him. I didn't cry. I just stood there and let him see what 15 years of doing it alone looks like. Then his eyes moved past me, to Harold, to Elizabeth, to Kenneth, to John, 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. I saw the exact second realization hit him, not just that they existed, but that they were his. His face went white. His knees looked unsteady. 4, he whispered. "No. This you left before I could finish the sentence," I said quietly. "You never waited to hear the word babies, let alone 4. He reached for the wall to steady himself. For the first time in his life, I think gravity won. Harold stepped forward, shoulders squared. "You don't get to faint," he said, voice low but firm. "You get to decide." Carl tore his gaze from the children and looked at him. Really looked. "How old are you?" 17, Harold answered. "Old enough to remember every time my mother came home tired and still cooked dinner." Carl swallowed hard. "Harold." My son's name came out shaky, like he was testing how it fit in his mouth. Elizabeth stood slowly, tears already pooling. You really didn't know about us?" He shook his head, eyes shining. "I didn't, but that doesn't excuse that I never tried to find out." Kenneth crossed his arms. "So what now? You walk in, give some blood, save the day, and vanish again?" "No," Carl said softly. "I walk in, give what I can, and stay as long as you'll let me." John had been quiet this whole time, watching. Observing. Finally, he spoke. "If you're lying," he said, "she'll break before we do." He nodded at me. "So don't lie." I felt that like a blow and a blessing. Carl looked at me then, and for once there was no boardroom confidence in his eyes. Just a man stripped of every excuse. "I'm not lying," he said. "I can't fix the years I missed, but if you'll let me, I can bleed for the ones ahead." The words hung between us. Dr. Kevin appeared at the edge of the group, clearing his throat gently. "Mr. Arturo, we need to run final tests and get you prepped. Time matters here. Time. The one thing we'd both abused in different ways." Carl nodded, tore his gaze away from the kids, and followed the doctor down the hall. He walked slower than usual, each step heavy, as though he understood that with every pace forward, the past was catching up. The kids watched him go. Elizabeth clutched her hands to her chest. "Mom, yes. Are we doing the right thing?" I looked at her, at all of them, and knew this was one of those moments that would echo for years. "We're doing the only thing we can," I said. "We're giving your brother a chance." "And him?" Harold asked quietly. "Are we giving him a chance too?" I met his eyes. "That part is up to you." He nodded, the weight of a choice too big for his age settling on his shoulders. In that instant, I realized something. This story was no longer just about the woman abandoned or the man who left. It was about 4 teenagers who would decide what legacy meant: bitterness or rebuilding. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the hurt, a small, stubborn part of me whispered, "Please, let this be worth it." If you're still here, it's because some part of this feels close to your own heart. So stay with me. Not for him, not even for her, but for every woman who's ever had to choose courage while holding her fear in the same shaking hands. The hospital at night feels like a confession booth. Too bright to hide, too quiet to pretend. They moved Carl Quickly Lab's signatures, sterile questions asked in careful tones. I watched from the end of the corridor as nurses guided him through the doors marked authorized personnel only. The last thing I saw before they closed was his face pale, stunned, but set with something I hadn't seen in him before. Not ambition, not charm, resolve. When he disappeared from view, it hit me. I had just placed my son's life in the hands of the man who once didn't want mine. I sank into a chair outside Kenneth's room, the plastic digging into my spine. For a moment, I let the weight of the years come down all at once. The years of grocery lists written with coins instead of confidence. The birthdays with one parrot at the table and one ghost in the room. The nights I'd stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made the right choice keeping them from a man who didn't try to stay. Now here we were. Fate had dragged his name back into our story, and I dialed anyway. The kids were quiet when I went back in. Kenneth lay on the bed, hooked up to more machines than any boy his age should know. The steady beeping sounded almost smug, like the universe reminding us how fragile everything really was. Harold sat on the edge of the bed, forearms on his knees, eyes on the monitor. Elizabeth perched in a chair, one hand wrapped around Kenneth's, thumb tracing the knuckles in slow circles. John leaned against the far wall, absorbing every detail. They all looked up when I entered. "Is he really..." "The only one?" Harold asked. "Yees." My voice came out softer than I meant. Genetically, medically, he's the match. Kenneth swallowed. "So if he walks away again, he won't," I cut in. "How do you know?" I met his gaze. "Because this time, he's not just walking away from me. He'd be walking away from you. And that's a different kind of cowardice." Kenneth didn't argue. He just stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched, eyes shining. Elizabeth sniffed. What did he look like? I almost laughed at the question. Of all the things to ask, older, I said. Tired, shocked, like he'd been punched? Harold said. "Yes." "Good," Kenneth muttered. John finally spoke. "Did he ask about us?" I nodded. "Yes. Not enough, but yes." John thought about that, then looked away. "I used to imagine how he'd look," he murmured. "Sometimes he was kind. Sometimes he wasn't. He never looked scared, though." "He's scared now," I said quietly. "Maybe for the first time about something that actually matters." Hours blurred into blurry shapes of nurses and paperwork. At some point, a nurse came to tell us they'd begun further compatibility checks. "It all lines up," she said. "He's a strong candidate. Strong candidate. Funny phrase for the man who once failed the only test that mattered." I walked back to the small family waiting room. It was nearly empty, just a muted TV in the corner and a stack of magazines 3 seasons out of date. I sat, hands folded, listening to the low buzz of hospital life. Behind that hum, my memory rolled out like a film reel. 15 years earlier, I'd been in a different hospital bed, sweat sticking to my hairline, pain ripping through my body in waves. "Almost there," the nurse had said. 3 heartbeats, a good wait. Her eyes had widened. She'd looked at the screen again. 4, she whispered. "There are 4. I remember laughing high, hysterical, almost unhinged. Of all the impossible things, life had chosen this one for me. 4 babies. 1 parent. I could have called him then. I could have demanded he show up, forced his name into the story whether he wanted it or not. Instead, I looked at 4 tiny faces, heard 4 thin cries, and decided that the only man who had the right to be in their lives was one who chose them. He hadn't chosen, so I had. Now, years later, life had thrown us into a scenario where choosing wasn't metaphorical. It was literal, medical, immediate. This wasn't about who tucked them in. This was about who kept their lungs filling with air. I don't know how long I sat there before footsteps approached. "Mrs. Hill," I looked up. Dr. Kevin again. His expression was different this time, less guarded. "We've completed the final match testing," he said. "It's confirmed. He's compatible." My hands loosened. "So he can donate?" Yes, he said. It's risky, but within safe ranges. He's already consented. He signed. He nodded. Everything. Paternity acknowledgement, procedural consent, post-op requirements. No hesitation. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The man who once walked away from a sentence he didn't want to hear had now signed papers binding him to 4 children forever. I didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. So I settled on being both. When I stepped into the consultation room later, he was there. Sitting at the table, hands folded, a stack of signed documents between us. He looked up as the door closed behind me. They wanted you to review everything, he said, voice quiet. To make sure you're comfortable. He almost choked on the last word. I pulled the papers toward me. His signature looped under every important line. Under each child's name, Harold Hill, Elizabeth Hill, Kenneth Hill, Jonathan Hill, 4 acknowledgments, 15 years late. Does it bother you? He asked softly. What? I said, not looking up. That I'm attached to them on paper now. That I exist. Officially, I took a breath. What bothers me is that they carried your absence long before they carried your name. He closed his eyes for a moment. I deserve that, he murmured. You deserve the truth, I said. And so do they. He studied me across the table. I told the doctor I'll do whatever it takes, he said. As much marrow as they need. As many follow-ups as required. No delays. Why? The words slipped out sharper than I meant. Why now? Why this? He didn't flinch. Because this is the first time in my life I've been asked to give something only I can give that isn't money. And I'm tired of being the man who says no when it counts. Something in his voice, raw, stripped, almost boyish, made it impossible to hide behind sarcasm. I sighed. This doesn't erase anything. I know, he replied. I'm not trying to erase it. I'm trying to live with it differently. We sat in silence for a while. The clock ticked. The lights hummed. The future waited. You should see them, I said finally. His eyes widened. Now, yes, before the surgery. They deserve to ask what they need to ask. Fear flickered across his face, not of the procedure, but of 4 teenagers and their questions. I'm not sure I have the right answers, he admitted. Then give honest ones, I said. They've survived too much for anything less. He nodded slowly. Will you be there? He asked. No, I held his gaze. This is between you and them. He swallowed. Okay. I walked him to the small family room with the glass partition, then stopped at the doorway. Inside, my children looked up as he entered. Harold's expression hardened. Elizabeth's eyes filled. Kenneth's jaw tightened. John's face stayed unreadable. Carl glanced back at me one last time as if to ask, Are you sure? I just nodded and stepped away, moving to the other side of the glass. If you've ever had to watch your children ask questions you spent years shielding them from, you understand the particular ache that followed. Their voices would be the verdict. His answers would be the evidence. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something I hated admitting. Hope. Not for us. Not yet. For them. Because whatever happened next, one thing was certain. He wasn't hiding anymore. Morning didn't arrive with sunlight. It arrived with forms. Hospitals love paperwork almost as much as they love fluorescent lights. A nurse led us to a consultation room, the same cramped space where bad news liked to sit. On the table lay a stack of documents, crisp, white, unforgiving. Carl sat on one side of the table, shoulders squared like he was heading into a board meeting. I sat on the other, hands folded in my lap to hide their tremor. Doctor, Kevin stood between us, speaking in that careful tone people use when they know the words hurt, no matter how softly they're wrapped. The procedure carries risk for both patient and donor, he said. We've gone through the medical implications. Now we need to formalize consent and clarify legal guardianship and paternity. Legal, guardianship, paternity. 3 words that should have come into our lives 17 years ago and were just now catching up. He slid the papers toward Carl. These documents acknowledge your role as biological father to all 4 minors. It doesn't erase the past, but it clarifies the present and protects their medical rights. Carl stared at the stack. I watched his jaw flex, the muscle ticking as if each page weighed more than steel. He picked up the pen. You don't have to watch, he murmured without looking at me. But I did, because I had watched school plays alone, parent-teacher conferences alone, Christmas mornings alone. Watching him sign his name under 4 children he never raised was the least the universe owed me. He moved to the first line. Harold Hill. His hand trembled only slightly as he signed. He's strong, Carl said quietly. Protective. He had to be, I replied. You left him no choice. The pen moved to the second line. Elizabeth Hill. He paused before writing. She looked at me like she wanted to believe, and didn't dare. Elizabeth learned early that hope is expensive, I said. He swallowed, then signed anyway. The third line waited. Kenneth Hill. The pen hovered. He blinked hard, eyes suddenly shining. He's angry, with reason. He nearly died, I said softly. Anger is cheaper than fear. He nodded once and signed, the ink dragging slightly where a tear hit the paper. Finally, the fourth line. Jonathan Hill, my quiet one. He sees everything, Carl whispered. He speaks less than all of them, but when he does, it hits like a verdict. John doesn't waste words, I said. He gets that from you. Or maybe from what you weren't. He didn't answer. He just signed. 4 names, 4 signatures, 15 years late. He set the pen down and exhaled like something inside his chest had finally admitted defeat. It's done, he said. No, I replied, it's begun. If you've ever been forced to open a door you swore you'd nailed shut just to protect the people you love, know this. You're not weak for doing it. You're braver than anyone who left you holding the hammer. Doctor, Kevin gathered the papers. We'll file these immediately, he said. From this point on, he's listed as legal father in all medical documentation. Words. Ink boxes checked. It shouldn't have meant as much as it did. And yet seeing his name beside theirs did something ugly and necessary inside me, like setting a bone that had healed crooked. After the doctor left, silence settled in the room like dust. Carl stared at the door, then at his hands. I always assumed my legacy would be numbers, he said. Stock values, buildings, deals, he gave a humorless laugh. Now it's 4 signatures on a form I should have signed before they ever took their first breath. Legacy isn't what you leave in your will, I said. It's what your absence taught them to live without. He flinched like I'd struck him. Do you hate me? He asked quietly. I thought about it. Really thought about it. I did, I admitted, for a long time. Then I got too tired to keep feeding the hate. Survival took all my energy. He nodded slowly. I deserve that. You deserve the truth, I said. And so do they. He looked up. Then let me give it to them. It took me a second to understand. You want to talk to them alone, I said. Yes. My protective instincts rose like sirens. The memory of tiny hands, feverish foreheads, broken teenage voices asking, why didn't he want us? Flooded my chest. What if you say the wrong thing? I asked. I've already done the worst thing, he answered. I left. I can't make that disappear. But I can refuse to lie about it. He met my eyes, and for a moment I saw him as he'd been before everything. The boyish man who'd made me believe in forever. Please, he said simply, let me face what I ran from. There's a kind of strength older women know too well, the strength of letting someone try again when every part of you wants to slam the door. If that's you, you already know how heavy my next word felt. 5 minutes, I said. No promise. No expectations, just truth. He nodded, relief flooding his face like light slipping under a door. I walked him down the hallway. The kids were in the family room, sitting in a crooked circle around the low table paper cups, snack wrappers, and tension scattered between them. They looked up when we entered. I'll be outside, I told them, right behind the glass. 4 pairs of eyes searched my face for clues. I gave them none. This part had to belong to them. I stepped out into the corridor and took my place behind the glass partition as Carl walked in alone. He closed the door gently behind him. The room went quiet. Not empty quiet, charged quiet like the air before a summer storm. I pressed my hand against the glass, fingers splayed, as if I could shield them through a barrier words couldn't cross. What do we even call you? Kenneth said first, cutting through the silence. Carl? Father? The guy who left? Carl sat down slowly, folding his hands. You can call me whatever feels honest, he said. I've earned most of it. And just like that, the real reckoning began. The glass between us wasn't thick, but it felt like a wall built from every year he'd been gone. On one side of it, me standing in the corridor, heart banging against my ribs, hand pressed flat to the cool surface. On the other side, my children and the man who had missed their entire lives. Carl sat down slowly at the low table. He didn't reach for anyone. Didn't try to force familiarity where there was none. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me, he began. Kenneth snorted. We didn't exactly agree. We just didn't walk out. Harold shot him a look, but didn't correct him. Because he was right. Carl nodded. Then thank you for not walking out. Silence. He let it sit. For once, he didn't rush in to control the room. If this feels like a conversation you've had in your own head for years, what you would say if the person who hurt you had to finally sit down and listen, stay. Your heart deserves to hear this play out, even if the faces are different. Harold leaned forward first. He'd been born a protector, whether he wanted the job or not. Let's start simple, he said. Why did you leave? Carl inhaled, then exhaled slowly. Because I was a coward. Kenneth rolled his eyes. Wow, straight to the confession. Carl didn't flinch. Your mother told me she was pregnant. I was on my way to a meeting I thought would change my life. I decided I could circle back to that conversation later. He looked down at his hands. I never circled back. Elizabeth's voice trembled. You just walked away? Yes, he said quietly. I told myself I wasn't ready, that I'd ruin her life if I stayed, that I had too much to lose. You did ruin her life, Kenneth snapped. You just did it from a distance. I know, Carl replied. That's what I live with. John, who'd been silent, finally spoke. Did you ever wonder, even once, where she went? What happened? Carl closed his eyes briefly. I tried not to. The honesty stung more than any polished lie. I told myself she was better off without me, he continued. So every time her name came to mind, I buried it with work, noise, deals. I built a wall out of schedules and deadlines. It took less effort than facing what I'd done. But you had everything, Elizabeth whispered. Money, success, power. I had distraction, he corrected gently. Not peace. There's a difference. From behind the glass, my chest ached, because as much as I hated the truth, I recognized it. Loneliness comes in more than one outfit. Harold's jaw tightened. So now you show up because your blood can save him? He glanced toward the hall where Kenneth's room waited. And that makes up for all the years you didn't bother? No, Carl said. It doesn't. He laced his fingers together, knuckles white. Nothing I do will make up for the birthdays I wasn't there for. The nights your mother carried fevers alone. The school forms where my name was a lie or a blank line. He looked at each of them in turn. I'm not here to fix the past. I can't. I'm here because your brother needs to survive. And for once, I'm the one who has to bleed for someone else. The room went quiet again. This was the kind of silence older women know all too well, the silence where you're waiting to see if a man will try to spin the story or finally tell it straight. Elizabeth wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Did you love her? She asked. Our mom? Carl's answer came without hesitation. Yes. Then why wasn't that enough? He swallowed hard. Because love without courage isn't enough. I loved her, but I loved my fear more. I loved my image more. I loved staying in control more. He shook his head. Your mother wanted a partner. I was a storm pretending to be a shelter. Kenneth leaned back, anger and something like reluctant curiosity fighting in his face. Do you want us now because you feel guilty? Or because we're some sort of legacy project? Carl held his gaze. I want you now because for the first time in my life I understand what I threw away. He let out a breath that sounded older than he was. I see your faces and I see the years I missed. I hear your voices and hear every why you had to answer without me. I chose wrong. I chose work. I chose pride. I chose fear. And I live with that every day. The words I chose wrong hung in the air like a sentence finally being read aloud. From my side of the glass, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the realization that he wasn't hiding behind excuses anymore. John broke the silence next. If Kenneth didn't need you, he asked quietly, would you have still wanted to find us? The question sliced through the room. Carl didn't rush to answer. He sat with it. Let it hurt. Yes, he said at last. But it would have taken me longer. Too long. I was already starting to feel the gap. To notice that everything I'd built felt hollow. He looked down. I thought I could live with being alone if I stayed successful. Turns out, success doesn't visit you in the hospital when your body starts to fail. He looked up again, eyes bright. Needing to save Kenneth forced the issue. But wanting to know you? That part was already there. I just hadn't been brave enough to act on it yet. Harold studied him for a long, measured moment. Bravery would have been staying, he murmured. You're right, Carl said. And that's why I won't use the word sorry like a reset button. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm only asking for the chance to prove I can be different from this day forward. If you are a woman who has heard a man say I'm sorry when what you really needed was, I was wrong, and I'm going to act differently, let this sink in. You were never asking for too much. You were asking for the bare minimum of respect. Elizabeth's voice wobbled. What if we can only ever give you pieces? Then I'll be grateful for pieces, he said. You don't owe me a whole anything. Kenneth scoffed, but the edge had dulled. You keep talking about what you want to do now, but what about Mom? You broke her. Yes, Carl said simply. And she put herself back together without me. That's something I have to honor, not invade. He glanced briefly toward the glass, toward where I stood unseen. If she lets me, I'd like to stand beside her. Not to replace the years I missed, but to carry some of what she's been carrying alone. He turned back to them, but that's her choice, just like this is yours. Harold finally exhaled. You're going through with the surgery? Yes. Even though it could hurt you? Yes, why? Because this, he gestured around the room, is the first truly right thing I've been asked to do in a very long time. I won't run from it. John's gaze softened just a fraction. Then I hope you wake up, he said. Carl smiled faintly. Me too. A knock at the door cut through the tension. A nurse peeked in. They're ready to prep for surgery, she said gently. Carl stood slowly. Whatever you feel about me, he told them, don't let it stop you from holding on to each other. Your mother gave you that. Don't throw it away because of what I did. Harold rose and extended his hand, not open-armed affection, but measured acknowledgement. Come back, he said. Then we'll see what's left to talk about. Carl clasped his hand, eyes damp. I will. Elizabeth stepped forward, then stopped, conflict painting her face. If this works, she whispered, and he lives because of you, I don't know how to feel about you. That's okay, Carl said. Feel however you need to. I can handle it. Kenneth didn't move from his seat, but as Carl passed him, he muttered, don't die trying to impress us. Carl huffed a tiny laugh. For once, I'm not doing this to impress anyone. John watched him reach the door, then added quietly, we'll be here when you wake up. That's the best promise I can make today. Carl nodded, throat too tight for words, and stepped out into the hall. He walked past me, close enough that I could see the sheen in his eyes, the weight in his shoulders. He didn't reach for me. He just said they're extraordinary, like a confession. They had to be, I replied. As they wheeled him away toward the operating room, I realized something that scared me almost as much as losing him had once scared me. For the first time since he left, he wasn't hiding. And neither was I. Hospitals at dawn feel like they're holding their breath. The sky outside was still a deep blue, not quite night, not yet morning. Inside, the lights hummed with the same relentless brightness, indifferent to whether we were breaking or healing. They wheeled Kenneth toward the operating room first. He looked smaller than usual in the hospital gown, his usual fire muted by fatigue. Still, he managed a half-smirk when he saw my face. Hey, he whispered, voice hoarse. If I make it out, I'm never letting you forget I technically died a little bit. Do you know the guilt power that ives me? I huffed out a laugh I didn't feel ready for. You won't need guilt. You already have attitude, he smirked. I get it from you. You get it from surviving, I said. They let me walk beside his bed until the double doors. I kissed his forehead, memorizing the warmth of his skin, the curve of his cheek, the way his eyelashes still curled like they did when he was 5. Don't go anywhere, I whispered. I'll try not to, he murmured, eyes already drooping under the pre-op meds. You still owe me new headphones. Then he disappeared through the doors, swallowed by white coats in quiet urgency. An orderly rolled another bed past me a few minutes later. Cottle! He lay there in a matching gown which looked wrong on him, like Power dressed in borrowed clothes. Without his suit, without his watch, without his usual armor, he seemed almost ordinary. He caught my eye as they paused to adjust a monitor. This feels strangely familiar, he said dryly. Me in a hospital, you looking like you're about to carry the world alone. I am carrying it, I said. The only difference is this time you're helping. He smiled faintly. I'm sorry it took me so long to show up. I know. He reached for my hand. I hesitated, then let him take it. His grip was warm, solid, but not possessive. If I don't, he began. I squeezed his fingers sharply. No. You don't get to make speeches that sound like endings, I said. You do the surgery. You wake up. Then you earn the right to say more. He looked at me with something like awe. You always were braver than me. No, I replied. I was just alone. There's a difference. He nodded once, that humility I'd come to recognize flickering in his eyes. They began to wheel him away. Vivian? He called softly. Yes? Thank you for letting me try. I swallowed. Don't thank me yet. The doors closed, and for a moment, all I could hear was the echo of wheels on linoleum and my own heartbeat pounding out a rhythm that sounded like prayer and accusation all at once. If you've ever stood at the edge of a moment, knowing you've done everything you can, and now the rest is out of your hands, you know this particular kind of surrender. It isn't weakness. It's the strongest breaking a woman can do. The waiting room became our world again. Harold sat closest to the door, his posture straight but his leg bouncing rapidly. Elizabeth curled into a corner of the couch, arms wrapped around herself. John sat cross-legged on one of the plastic chairs, staring at the floor as if he could see the surgery happening through the tiles. No one turned on the TV. No one reached for a magazine. Time didn't pass in minutes, it passed in nurse footsteps and the squeak of distant wheels. At one point, Harold said, "If something happens to him, both of them," and stopped. I sat beside him. "We'll deal with what is, not what if," I said. "That's how we've made it this far." Elizabeth wiped her eyes. "I told God I'd be mad at him if this doesn't work," she whispered. "That's allowed," I said. "He survived worse than our honesty." John didn't speak, but he shifted his chair so his knee touched mine. "That's how he says I'm scared with proximity, not words." Waiting has a way of ripping open old memories. As the hours dragged, my mind slipped back to another hospital, another bed, another me. I saw my younger self again, gripping the rails as contractions tore through me, alone except for a nurse with kind eyes and tired shoes. "One more push," they'd said. "You're doing so well." They didn't know the father of those children was likely signing a deal somewhere, his mind already rewriting the story, so he wasn't the man who left. 4 cries. 4 tiny bodies placed in clear plastic cribs. 4 bracelets with my last name in blank space where his should have been. I had promised them silently, "You will never beg for love. Not from him. Not from anyone." And yet here we were now, asking his body for what his heart had refused back then. Life has a cruel sense of irony, but sometimes it also has mercy. After what felt like an entire lifetime folded into half a day, Kevin walked into the waiting room. His face was the first thing I looked at. Not the chart in his hand, not the clock behind him, just his eyes. They weren't grieving. "They're both out of surgery," he said. "It went as well as we could have hoped." Elizabeth made a small broken sound and covered her mouth. "Kenneth?" Harold asked. "Stable, doctor," Kevin said. "We'll watch him closely for rejection, but so far his body is accepting the graft. It'll be a long recovery, but he's a fighter. That's working in his favor." "Unmanaged. He's in recovery," the doctor replied. "We took as much as we safely could. He's exhausted, but his vitals are strong. Relief didn't come like fireworks. It came like a chair finally taking your weight after you've been standing too long. My knees gave out, and I sat hard." Elizabeth sobbed into her hands. Harold bowed his head. John exhaled so slowly it sounded like air leaving a sealed room. "Doctor," Kevin smiled gently. "You can see Kenneth first, then Mr. Arturo afterward, one at a time." "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, then added quietly, "Whatever their history is, today he showed up." When he left, I stood, legs shaking. "Come on," I told the kids. "Let's go see your brother." Kenneth looked impossibly fragile when we saw him. Paler than usual. Smaller, but alive. Machines beeped softly beside him. Lines and tubes tangled like vines across his chest. Elizabeth went to his side immediately. "You look terrible," she sniffed, tears spilling. "Gee," he rasped, "thanks." Harold laughed through his own tears. "He's fine." John stood at the foot of the bed, hands shoved into his pockets. "You scared us," he said quietly. "Thought I'd give you something to talk about," Kenneth muttered. I brushed my fingers across his hair. "You get one dramatic medical event," I said. "That's it. No sequels." He smirked faintly. "Tell my cells that." We stayed until a nurse gently suggested we let him rest. On the way out, I paused at the doorway, taking in the rise and fall of his chest, the faint tension still in his shoulders even in sleep. My boy. Still here. Carl's room was dimmer. When I stepped inside, he was awake, barely, eyes half open. The monitors beside him beeped steadily. He looked emptied. Not weak exactly, but as if something deep inside had been poured out and used for something worthy for the first time. "You look awful," I said softly. He smiled, a slow, tired smile. "You always did know how to charm a man." I moved closer. "You did it," I said. "He's stable, breathing, alive." A single tear slipped from the corner of his eye. "Good," he whispered. "Good." I sat in the chair beside his bed. For a moment we just listened to the monitors keeping time. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Like a truck hit me," he said, then reversed, twice. That sounds about right. He turned his head to look at me more fully. "Did they hate me in there?" "They were honest," I said. "You asked for that." He nodded. "They deserved it." He swallowed, wincing slightly. "Do you hate me less after this?" I thought about it. "I don't know if hate is the word anymore," I said. "You're complicated in my chest." He huffed a weak laugh. "That's fair." I watched him for a long moment. "I need you to understand something," I said. "You surviving this doesn't mean we're healed. It means we have a chance to heal." He held my gaze. "I know," he replied. "Surviving doesn't earn forgiveness. It just buys me time to try." There it was again, that new, hard-won honesty. "Vivian?" he asked quietly. "Yes, I want to be part of their lives, not as a visitor, not as a donor on a chart, as their father, whatever that can look like at this stage." My chest tightened. "That's not my decision," I said. "Not entirely. They're old enough to choose." "Then I'll ask them," he said. "One by one if I have to. I'll show up until showing up stops surprising them." I exhaled. "You don't get to come in and fix everything with a surgery and a smile." "I don't want to fix everything," he said. "I just want to stand in the mess and not run." For the first time since I'd met him, I believed him. Later, when we stepped out of his room, the hallway felt different. Not lighter, just honest. Kenneth was alive. Carl was alive. The past was still the past. But for the first time, the future didn't feel like something I had to carry alone. Recovery didn't sound like dramatic music. It sounded like alarms that didn't go off. Weeks turned into a new kind of normal. Kenneth slowly gained strength. The dark circles under his eyes faded. His laughter, when it came, wasn't as forced. Carl kept showing up, not with flowers or gifts, not with expensive gestures. He arrived with coffee, with rides, with time. He sat through follow-up appointments, listened to doctors, asked questions that were more about Kenneth's comfort than about statistics. He learned the names of nurses. He took notes. He was there. And if you've ever been the woman left holding everything, you know that's the currency that matters most. Not promises, presence. You already know where this slow arc leads from earlier drafts, school meetings, simple dinners, cautious conversations, and a man slowly learning that staying is an action, not a statement. If this story has brushed against a tender place in you, if you've ever rebuilt a life from pieces someone else left behind, don't carry it in silence. Let stories like this sit with you. Let them remind you that your own chapters aren't finished yet. Carl didn't come back into our lives with a grand speech. He came back with a schedule. Tuesdays, Kenneth's physical therapy. Thursdays, Elizabeth's piano practice, where he sat quietly in the back. Every other Friday, parent meetings at school, where teachers raised their eyebrows the first time he showed up, then adjusted quickly. He didn't try to take over. He simply took up some of the weight. The kids adjusted in their own ways. Harold started forwarding him college brochures. "What do you think?" he'd ask casually, like he wasn't actually inviting him into the decision. Elizabeth texted him songs. "This reminded me of you and Mom," she'd type, even when the lyrics were messy and complicated and full of almosts. Kenneth complained the loudest and accepted the most help. "If you're going to lurk at my appointments, at least bring snacks," he'd grumble. And Carl would. Every single time. John never said much, but one afternoon I saw them in the backyard, both kneeling by the broken fence. They weren't fixing it well, but they were fixing it together. "He talks more when you're not around," Carl told me later. I smiled. "He trusts people who stay through the boring parts." Carl nodded. "Then I'll keep showing up for boring." One evening, months after the surgery, we found ourselves alone in the kitchen. The kids were in the living room arguing over a movie. The house thrummed with the low, ordinary noise I had once begged the universe for. He was drying dishes. I was rinsing them. It was almost domestic, almost normal. "Do you ever—" he began, then stopped. "Ever what? Wish it had been different?" I set the plate down. "Of course. I mean for you," he clarified. "If I had stayed back then. If I had been the man I'm finally learning to be now." I thought about it, hands braced on the edge of the sink. "If you'd stayed as the man you were then," I said slowly, "you would have broken us from the inside. I would have spent years trying to fix you while losing myself." He went quiet. "I don't know how to be grateful for your absence," I continued, "but I do know that it forced me to become someone who could stand without you." He nodded, eyes wet. "And now?" "And now," I said, "I'm choosing whether I want to stand with you, not because I need to, but because I might want to." His breath hitched. Where are you leaning? Toward the version of you who shows up at 7 a.m. with coffee and doesn't run when things get hard, I replied. He smiled at that, small and cautious. That's the only version I'm interested in being. New Year's Eve again, but this time the smell in the air is different. No antiseptic, no burned coffee. Just cinnamon, candle wax, and the soft sweetness of something baking in the oven that may or may not turn out right. The house is full. Not of visitors, not of doctors of family. Harold is taller somehow. He leans over the counter, reading aloud a list of college supplies he'll need in the fall. Elizabeth steals sprinkles from the bowl when she thinks no one is looking. Kenneth limps a little less when he crosses the room, his movements slower but no longer fragile. John sits by the window, sketching the rest of us in quick, clever strokes. The TV in the corner hums with another countdown special. The world once again prepares to cheer for a year it doesn't yet understand. Carl stands near the doorway, watching the chaos like a man who still can't quite believe he gets to be part of it. Déjà vu? I ask, stepping up beside him. Sort of, he says. Except this time, no one's hooked up to machines. That helps, I say. He looks at me. You okay? I nod slowly. More than I was a year ago. Me too, he admits. At 11:50, someone turns the volume up on the TV. The camera on the screen pans across a glittering crowd, all sequins and noise. Our living room, by contrast, feels soft and worn and utterly precious. 10 minutes, Harold announces, checking his watch like an event planner. 10 minutes until what? Kenneth asks. Another 12 months of homework? 10 minutes until another year you're alive, Elizabeth says pointedly. He snorts. Okay, Fea. John glances over his sketchpad. Hold still, he murmurs. I'm trying to capture this exactly. What's this? Carl asks. John shrugs. All of it. I stand in the middle of the room and let myself absorb it, every sound, every face, every ordinary miracle. 1 year ago, this night smelled like fear and sounded like monitors. Now it smells like sugar and sounds like my children arguing over which movie to start at midnight. Outside, faint fireworks start early, streaking the sky with brief, defiant color. Remember last year? Elizabeth says quietly, drifting to my side. Every second, I answer. I thought we were going to lose him, she whispers. I know. She looks at Carl, who's now helping Kenneth adjust his footing near the couch. I didn't think I'd ever forgive him. And now? She thinks, then exhales. I don't know if forgive is the right word, but I don't feel empty when he walks into the room anymore. That's something, I say. She nods. It is. The countdown begins. 10. We don't shout along with the TV. We just look at one another. 9. Harold tosses confetti from a dollar store tube. It misfires and falls mostly on himself. Everyone laughs. 8. Kenneth leans back against the arm of the couch, one hand subconsciously resting over his chest. 7. Elizabeth reaches for John's hand without looking. He lets her take it. Sis. Carl glances at me, eyes asking a question he doesn't voice. 5. I step closer, not all the way into his arms, but close enough that our shoulders touch. 4. He exhales slowly, like that small contact is more than he expected. 3. The screen flickers with images of strangers kissing in crowded streets. 2. In here, no one makes a speech. No one makes a promise they can't keep. 1. The year turns. No fireworks inside. Just a soft collective breath of relief, of gratitude, of something that feels like a second layer of healing settling over the first. Carl doesn't move away from me. Neither do I. The thing about second chances is that they don't erase first wounds. They grow around them. Months after that second New Year's Eve, our life looks ordinary. Astonishingly, beautifully ordinary. The alarm goes off at 6. Harold mutters, 5 more minutes, even though he's the one who said it. Elizabeth makes too much toast. Kenneth complains his leg aches in the rain. John forgets his sketchbook and panics halfway down the street, making Carl turn the car around. And me? I drink my coffee at the kitchen table, watching a scene I never thought I'd see. All of us. In one place. Not perfect, but present. Carl moves through the morning like he's been in this choreography for years. He asks Harold about an upcoming exam, reminds Elizabeth not to skip breakfast, checks Kenneth's appointment time, asks John about a new drawing, even when all he gets is a half shrug in response. He turns to me last. Anything you need? He asks, not as an afterthought, but as part of the same sentence. I think about all the mornings I answered that question with silence because no one asked it. Help with the dishes tonight, I say. "That's all. You got it," he replies. He leans in not for a showy kiss, not for something performative, but for a brief, gentle brush of his lips against my temple. Once upon a time, that kind of intimacy would have felt like a promise I couldn't trust. Now, it feels like a habit we're slowly choosing together. I've stopped trying to label what we are. We are not the couple we were at 23, breathless and reckless. We are not strangers, though we could have been. We are something in between an earned closeness. Love rebuilt, not restored. Some days the past still knocks. There are moments when old anger flares when I remember the ultrasound room he wasn't in, the first steps he didn't see, the fevers I paced through alone. But then I hear him in the next room, reminding Kenneth to do his therapy exercises. I see him at the table with Harold, going through scholarship applications. I catch him sitting in the living room long after everyone else has gone to bed, looking at the family photos Elizabeth insisted we finally print. And the anger doesn't disappear. It just has to share space with gratitude. The children claim him in their own ways. Harold calls him Dad now without flinching. It slipped out once and no one made a big deal of it. That's how you know it's real. Elizabeth writes his birthday on the family calendar without asking. Kenneth argues with him about everything: curfews, screen time, politics, but there's warmth under every word now. You only fight that hard with people you expect to stay. John doesn't say much, as always. But one day he pins a new drawing on the fridge, 6 figures at a dinner table. No labels. No names, just silhouettes, all close enough that their shadows overlap. Carl stands in front of it for a long time. "Is this us?" he asks. John shrugs. "Who else would it be?" I used to think happiness looked like the movie's big declarations, constant joy, clean endings. Now I know better. Happiness at this stage of life looks like a body that still carries you through the day, kids who talk back because they know they're safe, a man who once ran, choosing every day not to run anymore. It looks like doing the dishes side by side. Like arguing gently over whose turn it is to drive. Like falling asleep knowing that if the night gets heavy, there is someone else in the house who will hear it too. New Year's Eve is supposed to smell like champagne and hope. For years, mine smelled like antiseptic and fear. Now it smells like dinner on the stove, laundry in the basket, and a second chance still unfolding quietly, stubbornly, beautifully across the lives of 4 children, one woman who refused to break, and a man who finally learned how to stay.